G'day legends, thanks for joining me this morning as we take a look in detail at the bombing of the HK airport in Afghanistan. My guest this morning has spoken to Channel 9 in the article, What Life Would Be Like Under the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, he is an expert consultant in counter-violent extremism. He provides subject matter expert support to organizations across both counter-terrorism and counter-violent extremism. He provides subject matter expert to terrorism groups and reports to the courts to use this in cases. Mate, rather than an academic like Greg Barton, who has really never been there and just writes words, we wanted to get someone like Shane on, who still has contacts over there and has the lived experience of operating in the Middle East for many, many years. Shane, good morning, mate. Can you tell me a little bit about who is responsible, why, and how these attacks have happened at HK Airport, resulting in the deaths of those Marines and Afghan civilians?
Morning, Max. Yeah, 100%. Thanks for that awesome intro. So the attacks at Hamid Karzai International Airport have been attributed to the Islamic State Khorasan group. So it's one of the affiliates of the Islamic State more broader. The Islamic State, even when it had its caliphate in Iraq and Syria, was broken into what's called wilayets, so essentially regions, and then they had overseas wilayets when other organisations pledged allegiance to them. One of those organisations was the Islamic State in Khorasan, which is historical geographical area for Pakistan, Afghanistan, and into Iran. They started in around September 2014, and they were disenfranchised, more hardcore members of the Taliban that weren't happy with the way the Taliban were starting to negotiate for a peaceful outcome and had softened their, their religious rhetoric and, some not so hardcore Sharia law. So that's, I guess, the history of the group in about 30 seconds. There was information prior to the attacks that they were going to do it. If you remember, for about 3 or 4 days prior to the attacks, there was, even in the media, they were getting worried about the potential for the Islamic State to conduct some suicide attacks. This was from both classified collection means and word on the street. You know, they, as you know, when you're over there, there's a lot of markers that they'll put out because they target, even if it's civilians, but they know who they want to target. They were pretty successful, and I think one of the key things to remember in this is that they targeted the Taliban as well as the US.
Oh,
because
right.
they've been, So the Islamic State and the Taliban have been at war for control of territory and influence since 2015. So they're just as they view us or the West as much as an enemy as the Taliban. So they're not friends at all. And that's key to understand. And so what you're seeing now in Afghanistan is you're seeing the Americans and the Taliban jointly communicating in, in an old Arab proverb, an enemy of my enemy is my friend, to both locate, target the Islamic State Khorasan, which I'll now call ISK, to make sure both the Taliban and US troops and civilians are safe. Because the Taliban want the US out. And they know if they engage the US forces, the US will stay. And as President Biden said last night, Australian time, there's going to be retribution. The Taliban don't want that. They're like, look, just get whoever you've got to get and get out and let us run the country. The Islamic State or ISK don't want that. They want as much turmoil in Kabul as possible because it suits their narrative. And that's what you're going to see play out in the next, at least until the 31st, which is that hard line when the Taliban has said to the Americans, you've got to be out by. I don't think that's going to be realistic on a number of fronts. I think they'll talk tough because they've got to maintain support within their core group and supporter base, We're already seeing uprisings in some parts of Afghanistan against the Taliban. So by no means do they control the whole country. You're seeing in the Panjshir and other areas, especially in the Hazaran areas, the local militias are rising up and conducting offensive operations against the Taliban. So they want the US gone. That will take the media focus out of the country, and that way they'll be able to go on and form a legitimate government. What that looks like. Yep.
So have we effectively Californicated the Taliban? Like, have we achieved that they now want to form a government, and now they've got ISK wants it to be destabilized so that they can recruit, they can say, hey, look, we're actually solving your problems. Like, what is ISK's plan for?
So their plan is, as the Islamic State's overarching strategic intent is a global Islamic caliphate, but real hardline Sharia law. And this is the frustrating thing, you mentioned Greg Barton before, all these academics writing. Most of them haven't been there. They actually haven't spoken to recent or current Taliban leadership of what their strategic intent is. What it was in the late 80s, 90s into 2001 is completely different to what it is now, which is why they've lost those hardcore supporters who want to go back to that complete totalitarianism regime that they previously had. But a lot of the Taliban fighters and new members, remember, we were there for 20 years. So it's they're normal to they probably went to school with women. They probably went to clinics where there was female medics and doctors and stuff. And so it's not going to be what we would in the West consider normal for women, but it's going to be along the lines, and I've said this before, is what we see in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, those strong conservative Sunni countries. So there will be a strict Sharia law, but it won't be the hardline previous doctrine that we saw in Afghanistan. But that's what the Islamic State and the Khorasan want. They want that real hardline Salafist way of life.
And then how do you see this playing out? Will it, I think, what's the deadline? The 1st of September? Is that when the Taliban have given?
Yeah. 31st of August, 1st of September.
And then playing out from there, the Taliban effectively try to take control of the country, get the media out, and then they're going to go to war with ISK more so.
Well, so speaking of contacts on the ground, both US and Afghan, they're behind closed doors. They're trying to broker an extension, but they have to do it in a way that the Taliban save face, because the last thing they can do out of the gate is be seen to be bowing down to the Americans. So they're trying to come up with, and this is why ISK was dumb conducting those attacks, because all it's done is given the Taliban an excuse to allow the Americans to stay longer, because, like I said, an enemy of my enemy. So the Taliban go, look, we're trying to form a government. We've allowed you to repatriate, 60, 70,000 people, where we've cleared the airfield. We haven't attacked you. We've actually helped round up some of your people, including the Australians. So there was buses driving around Kabul, picking up people to take to the airport.
And the Taliban were doing that?
Yeah. So they had essentially bus stops, and whether it be Australian interpreters or American or citizens, they were told to meet at certain spots, and the bus turned up. Now, there's some reporting out of Kabul that the Taliban did stop some of those buses and conduct checks. There was one story, and it's from multiple sources, where the Taliban got on a bus, identified a local who was dressed as an airport worker, dragged him off the bus, and the guy next to him, who was actually an Australian citizen, checked their paperwork, let the Australian citizen back on the bus, and took the other guy who was dressed as a worker away. So they're doing their own checks, but they're assisting the US and Australia, France and Germany, the Brits, to get these people to the airport, to get them out of the country, because, like I said, it's not in their strategic interest to have America there.
Mate, I can't believe this has been an eye-opener, and I think having you on to do this sort of stuff through the weeks as we talk about the news and we get you experts that have been on the ground to come down and break down these issues of the Middle East and of terrorist organisations around the world, mate. We'd love to have you to keep coming back on as a panellist if you'd be keen.
Yeah, 100%. Anytime. We can either do, I guess, set days, or as things, maybe after the 31st, we see if what's going on, if the Americans have stayed, or
absolutely.
Because like yourself, as being an ex-veteran who worked with a lot of Afghans, we want to get the right people out and to safety, but it's a complex situation, and it's not over for a lot of people, because what will come next is the illegal immigrants, those that didn't get on the flights. We'll try to board boats or, to get in Australia that way and other countries. So, like I said, by no means is it over on a number of fronts. 100%. Get the correct information out to the people.
I think this is really important, especially in the veteran community, when they don't have, or anyone really, when you don't have that information and you start making up the information, or you get people who don't know the situation speaking on it, can increase that anxiety or that stress and anger.
Yeah, and what else is happening? And I read everything. There's a lot of circular reporting. So CNN will put a report out, and then, Channel 7 will jump on it, or their journal will jump on it, or Sky or whoever. And instead of them doing their own work, they're just regurgitating what CNN, and it's the same bias or, incorrect information, or it's 3 days old, or where, going back to army days, the diggers, they just want the no bullshit, black and white, what's going on the ground. And that's getting lost in the 24-hour, 36-hour, 72-hour news cycle.
Mate, absolutely. Guys, that was the update on the bombing at the HK airport. My guest was Shane Healey. Now, if you guys like that, we're going to keep getting on and keep this as the situation keeps unfolding. If you'd like what you heard this morning, please go and check out the podcast. That's coming out on Monday, the ISS podcast with Shane Healey. And we break down some of his Middle East experiences and his career. Thanks very much, guys. And stay tuned for more news next week.